Test, test, test.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Subcommittee on Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to identify opportunities to strengthen and expand the extraordinarily successful Abraham Accords. And at this time, I'd like to ask for unanimous consent that the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Brad Schneider, be allowed to sit on the dais and participate following all other members in today's hearing. No objection. I'm not going to recognize you. And so without objection, so ordered, okay? And one day we'll recognize people from Rhode Island, but it's going to be June, if you don't mind, after you're gone. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. And good afternoon and welcome, and this is really meaningful to me, the first hearing of the Middle East, North Africa, and Central Asia Subcommittee in the 118th Congress, and I'm really grateful ultimately to be serving again with Congressman David Cicilline, who has been the prior chairman, and prior to that, Ted Deutsch, and so it's been a bipartisan experience, and with Dean Phillips, I'm confident it will continue, and then Kathy Manning from the Republic of North Carolina is going to be sitting in today. One day it's going to be a state. And I want to thank our members for being part of the subcommittee. I want to thank the expert witnesses for being here today to provide insight into how we can most successfully expand the groundbreaking Abraham and historic Accords. I regret that the ranking member, Dean Phillips, is unable to be here today, but indeed, we are very fortunate to have Representative Kathy Manning from North Carolina. I look forward to a compelling conversation today of very talented people and in many more important hearings during this Congress as we promote the United States as the country that it is, so important in maintaining world stability. The historic Abraham Accords were one of the most consequential diplomatic achievements of my lifetime and a success of the Donald Trump administration. I was grateful to be present at the signing at the White House. The signing of these accords by the leaders of Bahrain, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates represented the single most significant step towards a stable and positive Arab-Israeli relations since Egypt and Jordan normalized relations in 1979 and 1974, respectively. We have already seen positive results, with Morocco formally joining and Sudan pledging to join the accords in 2021, and additional memorandums of understanding being signed to address issues of mutual concern. These agreements are a win for the region and a win for the United States. For decades, we've known that our friends in the Middle East all have shared interests for mutual benefit. Now, at long last, we can work together collaboratively to protect our countries, share technology and information, and grow our economies, address creating jobs, addressing the threat emanating from the kleptocratic Iranian regime issue of foremost concern. Both Israel and our Arab allies live under constant threat of Iranian-backed terrorism. Iran continues the enrichment of uranium while testing satellite-launched vehicles and proliferating drones to its proxies, as well as to war criminal Putin to kill innocent Ukrainians. Sadly, the Biden administration still seems to believe that diplomacy via a nuclear deal is possible. You cannot negotiate with those acting in bad faith, as we've seen time and time again. Working with our partners to deter these threats is critical to maintaining peace and stability through strength. The Abraham Accords coincided with Israel being moved into the responsibility of the U.S. Central Command from European Command. Now our Middle East partners can work together directly with the U.S. military on issues of shared concern, like Iran and the integrated air and missile defenses. After 3 major countries joining the Accords in quick succession, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco, we hope to see more countries join the Abraham Accords during the Biden administration. Changing minds is hard. Diplomatic breakthroughs are hard. It is not easy to change long-standing policies or public opinions. With all the momentum built up during the Trump administration, there have been at times questions regarding whether the Biden administration is sufficiently prioritizing the Accords. I'm pleased the administration has now embraced the name Abraham Accords. It has also worked to convene Israel and Arab partners to the Negev Forum. This forum is important for helping to deepen the relationships between Israel, UAE, Egypt, Morocco, and Bahrain, and the United States. It shows other countries in the region the positive benefits that can come from a relationship with Israel. In addition to security cooperation, the Abraham Accords have ushered in unprecedented economic cooperation. We're witnessing significant increase in bilateral trade between the signatories, as well as joint projects in technology, energy and infrastructure, healthcare, and tourism. These efforts will undoubtedly yield positive person-to-person results and increase prosperity for all involved. Still, there's more to be done. I hope our witnesses today can speak to the types of initiatives that will be required to bring important countries such as Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. We look forward to hearing from them about more details of how the Accords came to be, how we can strengthen relationships between countries that are parts of the Accords, and how we can bring new countries into these incredible agreements. I want to thank the witnesses for their time and expertise, and I yield to the stand-in ranking member, Congresswoman Manning, for her remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this important hearing. And on behalf of Ranking Member Dean Phillips, who asked me to fill in for him today, congratulations on holding your first hearing as subcommittee chair. We are all looking forward to working together with you in this Congress. And I want to thank our distinguished panel of witnesses for joining us today to share your expertise. In 1967, the League of Arab States put forward what is often referred to as the 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Despite these overtures, Egypt was the first country to break ranks and make peace with Israel in 1979, a decision that cost President Sadat his life. Jordan then followed suit in 1994, and since then, there had been no significant progress on regional peace agreements until the Abraham Accords, in which Bahrain, Morocco, the United Arab Emirates, and Sudan agreed to normalize relationships with Israel. This historic agreement changed the region practically overnight, leading to incredible opportunities for regional coordination and cooperation. With U.S. support, these countries chose to form a forward-looking group of nations in the Middle East focused on building a better and brighter future for their people and a more integrated and secure region. These countries also recognized a common interest in cooperating to counter the threats posed by Iran, the principal source of instability in the region. Iran's advancing nuclear weapons program, expanding ballistic missile and UAV programs, and support for armed proxy groups, including but not limited to Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and the Houthis in Yemen, all pose deep challenges to security and stability across the Middle East. Our partners and allies are clear-eyed about this threat and are working side by side in coordination with the United States to advance their shared security. Israel's integration into CENTCOM marked a huge step towards creating a more secure and prosperous region, and its role in the recent international maritime exercise, along with increased intelligence sharing, communication, and training, have demonstrated significant progress toward a more integrated regional security architecture. I'm eager to hear from our witnesses today about opportunities for expanded security cooperation, the prospect of a more integrated regional security framework, and how shared security concerns can promote further expansion of normalization between Israel and its neighbors. Security cooperation is important, but it cannot be the only leg on which relations between Israel and the Abraham Accords countries stand. The Biden administration has sought to deepen and expand Israel's engagement with its neighbors by establishing the Negev Forum, a new vehicle for implementing the Abraham Accords on a multilateral scale. The forum established 6 working groups on regional security, food and water security, tourism, trade, health, and education and tolerance, areas that highlight shared regional challenges and create opportunities for tangible benefits to the citizens of each country. These buckets have provided a framework to weave together the fabric of the Middle East. For example, the signing of the Israel-UAE Free Trade Agreement aims to bolster economic cooperation between the two countries, bringing trade volume from around $1 billion to $10 billion within 5 years. Increased trade and tourism, investment in technology and health, cooperation on cybersecurity and green energy, the opportunities are seemingly endless. I look forward to hearing from our guests today about how to advance Israeli-Arab engagement, promote greater regional cooperation, and engage the private sector and civil society in this effort. As we celebrate the Abraham Accords, the milestone for regional security and stability that it represents, and look ahead toward opportunities to expand the Accords, we must also try to find ways to include Palestinians in regional cooperative initiatives and continue working towards a comprehensive Israeli-Palestinian peace. Key additional regional players have indicated their interest in normalizing relations with Israel, but not without significant steps towards peace. As we look for ways to strengthen and expand the Abraham Accords, I'm interested in hearing about how these efforts can be used to help both Israelis and Palestinians make progress toward the long-term goal of a negotiated peace. And as we hold this hearing just weeks away from the convergence of Ramadan and Passover, I would further ask how the U.S. and our regional partners can support steps to de-escalate tensions. Since the Abraham Accords were announced by President Trump in 2020, there has been bipartisan support in Congress and across administrations for the Abraham Accords and ongoing efforts to support peace between Israel and its neighbors. The Middle East today is not the same region it was even a few years ago, and efforts to continue to enhance and expand the Abraham Accords are integral to building robust security and economic relationships, establishing people-to-people ties, and contributing to a more tolerant, peaceful region. So again, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I look forward to hearing from our distinguished panel, and with that, I yield back.
And thank you, temporary ranking member. I ask unanimous consent that a statement by Senator Jim Langford of Oklahoma and a statement of Representative Ann Wagner of Missouri be entered into the record. Without objection, so ordered. We're pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. The Honorable Rob Greenway, a graduate of the Virginia Military Institute, is President and Executive Director of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. He previously served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Middle East and North Africa at the National Security Council under the Trump administration. Also, General Joseph Votel is a Distinguished Fellow at the Middle East Institute. He served as Commander of U.S. Central Command from 2016 to 2019, and I know of his great service because I had the opportunity to visit with him and the great success. Thank you. Ambassador Daniel B. Shapiro is a Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. He served as the U.S. Ambassador to Israel from 2011 to 2017. I think you must have set a record, 6 years. I want to thank you all for being here today. Your full statements will be made part of the record, and I'll ask each of you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow members for questions, and they too will be strictly maintained, including me, of 5 minutes. I'll now recognize President Greenway for his opening statement.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Manning, members of the subcommittee, thank you all for the opportunity to testify on the development of the historic Abraham Accords peace agreements and the ways in which the United States can help ensure they reach their true potential. It's an honor to join Ambassador Shapiro and General Votel today. The Abraham Accords Peace Institute, where I serve as President and Executive Director, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit U.S. organization dedicated to supporting the implementation and expansion of the Accords. The primary platform for disseminating Accord progress, and we work with a broad range of actors abroad as appropriate to develop new opportunities in the fields of trade, investment, tourism, and people-to-people relationships. The Abraham Accords constitute the beginning of a transformation of a region that will continue to be a vital battleground astride security and economic interests of world powers. American leadership was a necessary but insufficient condition for the emergence of these agreements, and American leadership will remain essential to its growth and evolution. The alignment of our regional partners and allies in economic and security domains will ensure that the agreements endure. It'll also be incentivizing to others to join, pooling critical capacities to advance and defend mutual interests. This transformation serves to constrain the malign influence of Iran and Russia and predatory practices of China. These countries will continue to manufacture and exploit fissures among the U.S. and its regional partners if we fail to take advantage of the favorable shift in the region's security and economic architecture. On the other hand, appropriate support will allow the Abraham Accords to advance and secure America's interests with the use of significantly fewer resources and with more capable partners, integrated as never before. To give just a brief sense of the impact the Accords have had in just less than 3 years, in 2022, trade between Israel and regional peace partners as a whole reached $3.47 billion, up from $593 million in 2019. 470,700 Israelis have traveled to Abraham Accords countries in 2022, up from 39,300 in 2019. 17 new flight routes have been established to accommodate this growth. Cooperation has flourished in the fields ranging from water and food security, renewable energy, technology and innovation, healthcare, sports, trade, and investment. I would suggest 5 ways the U.S. can encourage and support these historic agreements. The first would be for the U.S. to support the establishment of an Abraham Accords free trade area, ensuring progress towards members' aspirations, preserve the integrity and stability of global markets, provide a tangible alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. We could begin by leveraging the matrix of free trade agreements and other bilateral agreements already in place between the U.S. and Accord members and between the Accords members themselves. According to RAND analysis, the benefits of a multilateral free trade area encompassing current signatories would create more than 150,000 new jobs and new economic activity exceeding $75 billion. A multilateral free trade area among the expanded number of potential Accord signatories could create as many as 4 million new jobs and $1 trillion in new economic activity. A second avenue would be to ensure resources dedicated to regional peace encompass the Accords and work with Accords members to reestablish the Abraham Fund, providing financial and technical support necessary to reduce poverty, expand infrastructure, and help improve health and education, reinforcing the Accords. A third way would be to connect Accords members and other partners to establish new overland trade routes, connecting its members from the Mediterranean to the Gulf. Such routes would revolutionize east-west trade, decrease associated transit times, costs, and risks, and strengthen resilience and prosperity. The fourth would be to support and resource a new enduring regional security architecture in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords as a foundation, while accelerating projected security assistance to Accord member countries. Only by making our partners and allies more capable will we mitigate the spectrum of risks to our vital national interests in the global economy. This would also reduce but not eliminate the requirement for a robust U.S. presence. A fifth way would be to leverage Abraham Accords to offset the loss of European energy following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and strategically realign our partners and allies by breaking the dependency on adversary resources. Without U.S. leadership, the historic agreements would not have been concluded. Absent sustained investment, they'll fail to achieve their potential. Such a setback would constrain the region's economic recovery from the pandemic, erode support for counterterrorism cooperation, open a door to malign influence by Russia and China, compromise regional stability, disrupt global markets, discourage essential cooperation, and provide an opportunity for resurgence of both ISIS and al-Qaeda. But if we seize the opportunity this historic agreement offers, the inverse holds. We would build upon it to enhance regional stability, security, and trade. We could also seize the opportunity for a U.S. regional security architecture built to safeguard an economic foundation that can endure, while reducing our costs and constraining our adversaries. The Abraham Accords and the Institute, which bears its name, hold the potential to serve as the foundation for an enduring peace in the Middle East. By demonstrating the tangible benefits of interpersonal ties, trade, commerce, and mutual cooperation, it's vital we seize this historic opportunity, unleash the potential of our partners and allies in the Middle East and North Africa, keep America safe, and help the region turn the page on a generation of conflict and instability. Thank you.
Thank you, President Greenway. And we now recognize General Votel for his opening statement. And General, I want to congratulate you 2016 to 19, the achievement of you and your personnel. There was no terrorist attack against the American people. And that, to me, is such an achievement. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you and to Representative Manning and to the distinguished members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to join my fellow panelists, Ambassador Dan Shapiro and Mr. Rob Greenway, in this hearing on expanding the Abraham Accords. I'm testifying today in my capacity as a former commander of U.S. Central Command and as well as a distinguished fellow at the Middle East Institute right here in Washington, D.C. The Abraham Accords were signed after my retirement and departure from command, as was the decision to include Israel in the U.S. Central Command's designated area of responsibilities. It was my view at the time, and it remains so today, that these accords and the decision regarding Israel were timely and essential steps in promoting stability and security across the region. In both cases, these actions represented the maturing of the political and security situations across the area. As noted in a recent report by the Jewish Institute for National Security of America, JINSA, the United States has a fundamental interest in strengthening the accords and helping ensure they achieve their full political, economic, and security potential. Less than 36 hours ago, I returned from my most recent travel to the Middle East. These trips have left me with three impressions that are germane to the issue we are discussing today. The first impression is that U.S. leadership in the region remains critical. While our force posture has changed due to policy decisions, focusing our attention and resources toward the pacing challenge presented by China, the U.S. remains an indispensable partner across the Middle East. The region looks to us for our leadership, for our world-class capabilities, and our values-based approaches. Initiatives like expanding the Abraham Accords are clear examples of things we can and must do to promote stability in a critically important region where we retain enduring interests. My second impression is the importance of continuous dialogue. The Middle East is an area with deep underlying tensions, which, left unattended, will work against the better interests of those who live in the region and those who retain vital national security interests there, including the United States. It is an area prone to misperceptions and failed expectations, and the only way through this is by effective communication and relationship building. We must have open dialogue and a framework to interact and operate that minimizes miscommunication while at the same time promoting better interaction in areas of common interest. Therefore, we must promote better relationships and more substantial cooperation and collaboration among our regional friends. The Abraham Accords are doing this today. My third impression is the need for a sense of urgency to move forward in the region. Change is coming quick to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia is a good example. There is profound and palpable change due to its 2030 vision and strategy, change that can be seen and heard. It is accelerating on a day-to-day basis. We should be encouraging this. Our adversaries and strategic competitors are operating with a sense of urgency as well. Iran continues its pursuit of nuclear capability and is doubling down on its malign influence activities across the region. Chinese influence is apparent across the region, and they continue to maneuver effectively into the spaces left behind by the U.S. to promote their economic and political objectives. These activities, and others like them, can undermine critical interests of the United States and our partners. In an era of great power competition, the United States must play its role. Today, that role is unlikely to be manifested by large U.S. military formations and long-term deployment across regional military bases. It is instead more likely to be pursued through improved security cooperation efforts, partnership, shared awareness and responsibility, and greater resilience among our friends and partners in the region. The best tool against these factors is not just better equipment and more U.S. troops on the ground. It is, in fact, strong relationships, effective communications, and trust. As a former boss reminded me often, you cannot surge trust in times of crisis. It must be nurtured and developed beforehand. The Abraham Accords are an essential hedge platform to promote better understanding, shared interests and responsibilities, and common expectations that lead to better trust. We must seize the opportunity it presents. There will be obstacles to expanding the Abraham Accords and pursuing meaningful progress under its rubric. Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon and continued efforts to sow instability and chaos across the region will continue to frustrate our efforts and pose real challenges, threats against our interests. Resolving the Palestinian situation remains essential for many in the region. This important issue will continue to resonate strongly in and out of the area. And of course, geopolitics will play a role as well. Our efforts and those of our allies to support Ukraine against unprovoked invasion by Russia, as well as China's posturing against Taiwan, will have impacts in the region that will challenge our goals and objectives. The United States has a critical role in overcoming these and other obstacles. We must be willing to lead and use our inherent attributes to bring parties together to expand and truly operationalize the accords in a way that allows for real change and progress. We can do this by being a good convener, bringing others together, and helping work through the issues with candid communications and trustful dialogue. And we must do this by recognizing the importance of acting now to strengthen and solidify emerging alignments and seize near-term opportunities. Once again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with the subcommittee today. I look forward to joining my panel colleagues in answering your questions and bringing more attention and understanding to what I believe is one of the most significant opportunities to promote stability in this region, a region where we have made extraordinary sacrifices and expended significant national treasure, and where we have and will continue to have enduring interests that are important to our security and prosperity.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General Votel. Thank you very much, General Votel. And now we're very grateful to have Shapiro for your opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Manning, thank you, and my thanks to Ranking Member Phillips for the opportunity to testify for the subcommittee on expanding the Abraham Accords. Like my colleagues on the panel, Rob Greenway, who was involved in the negotiating the accords, and General Votel, who had done so much for regional security, it's a subject I'm passionate about. I direct the N7 initiative, a partnership between the Atlantic Council and the Jeffrey M. Talpins Foundation that convenes conferences of Israeli and Arab experts to generate multilateral policy and program ideas to bring the benefits of normalized relations to the citizens of those countries. The past year has seen a great deal of progress in building on the Abraham Accords, thanks in no small part to the commitment of the Biden administration. I won't detail them all, but the Negev Summit, the Negev Forum, opening of airspace, free trade, and expanded trade between the parties, cybersecurity cooperation are all ongoing examples. And a number of challenges remain as well. The Negev Forum is a consensus organization. Consensus is sometimes hard to achieve. Jordan has not yet joined the group. There appears to be low and by some polling results declining public support for normalized relations with Israel, even in the UAE and Bahrain, and spiking Israeli-Palestinian tensions may weaken the popularity of the Abraham Accords. But none of those challenges diminish the progress that has been made, and with the remainder of my time, I'll outline a number of steps the United States should pursue to expand that progress that has been made to date. First, our strategy should be to combine U.S.-led security coordination with regionally led U.S.-supported integration in civilian fields. When it comes to building an integrated regional security architecture, there's no substitute for the United States as the convener, sponsor, and enabler. Our unique capabilities, our enduring presence in the region, and the way each U.S. partner looks to us to shape the security environment and coordinate responses to key threats makes the U.S. role essential. The Biden administration and CENTCOM leadership have embraced this responsibility, sponsoring joint exercises that improve interoperability, facilitating high-level strategic discussions on addressing the full range of threats posed by Iran and its proxies, and initiating the gradual process of integrating air defenses across these U.S. partners. It's not likely to become a Middle East NATO, but it does not need to be NATO to be meaningfully beneficial for the security of all who participate. But what it does need, like NATO, is the energetic leadership of the United States. Alongside the U.S.-led security architecture, we should support a regionally led web of non-defense integration. In parallel with the Negev Forum, there must be room for the emergence of a truly regional organization, like the European Union or ASEAN, that weaves together multilateral cooperation at every level in every area of governance, collaboration and integration of resources and capabilities, a regional free trade zone, and reinforcing linkages between private sectors, universities, professional organizations, religious communities, and other elements of civil society. Let's call this hypothetical organization AMENA, A-M-E-N-A, the Association of the Middle East and North Africa. AMENA has the advantage that it means trustworthy or reliable in both Hebrew and Arabic, and it will signal with trilingual clarity that it represents a community of trust, reliability, common interests, and the common benefits of security and prosperity. And as the participating countries benefit from this association, and as they forge a common regional identity, it will create incentives for other states to join, just as the EU and ASEAN expanded well beyond their original membership in their respective regions. Second, we should draw on all resources and expertise of the U.S. government and beyond to advance the U.S. interest in deep regional integration. At the Negev Summit working group meetings in January, over 40 U.S. government personnel from some 9 government agencies took part. That's an excellent showing and something to build on. While the State Department, Defense Department, military, USAID, under the guidance of the National Security Council, will always have the lead, nearly every cabinet department and federal agency has an international affairs department, and most have resources and programs available to promote international cooperation that serves U.S. interests. The House and Senate Abraham Accords caucuses are critical partners in this effort, able to use their diverse expertise and committees of jurisdiction to motivate and fund the work of the cabinet departments they oversee. In this context, I want to take note of H.R. 1268, a thoughtful bill introduced by Representatives Torres and Lawler to create a special envoy for the Abraham Accords. If Congress creates such a position, one of that official's most important duties might indeed be to serve as the traffic cop for an expansive and diverse set of U.S. government and non-government programs that support integration in various fields. Third, we must give special focus and priority to achieving Israeli-Saudi normalization while recognizing that it will take time and may advance in phases. Clearly, such an agreement would have many transformational effects given Saudi Arabia's centrality and influence as a leading nation in the Arab and Islamic world. In some respects, we see it happening gradually, but I'd caution against the narrative that Saudi Arabia is ready to normalize relations with Israel tomorrow as long as the United States provides the right quantities of weapons, security guarantees, or civil nuclear technology. Saudi-Israeli normalization is certainly in the United States' interest, and we should be prepared to contribute, as the United States has done in nearly all previous Arab-Israeli agreements, but it cannot be divorced from the U.S.-Saudi relationship, nor from other U.S. interests that we must protect. If, in fact, the United States would be expected to provide a range of benefits to Saudi Arabia at the time normalization occurs, there will also be things the United States needs from the Saudis, such as their commitment to stable oil markets and not to act in ways that run counter to core U.S. interests regarding Russia and China. A Saudi-Israeli deal is also unlikely to require nothing of Israel, especially in periods of heightened tensions with the Palestinians. And the U.S.-Israel dynamic will also be complicated. Israel may seek additional security assistance, which the United States has always provided, and the United States may seek from Israel steps to keep a two-state solution alive. Such an agreement would be a carefully balanced triangle, and it's worth pursuing with significant diplomatic resources, but it's far from automatic. Finally, I'll just endorse Congresswoman Manning's point that it is imperative and there is an opportunity to draw positive energy from the Abraham Accords into the deeply deteriorating Israeli-Palestinian arena. In short, no other regional development holds better prospects of breaking down Palestinian resistance to normalization with Israel or Israeli resistance to including Palestinians in the promise of a better region. And Arab states, as partners to both, are uniquely positioned to positively influence the decisions and actions of both sides in ways that can improve conditions on the ground and keep a two-state solution alive for a future attempt to reach it through negotiations. The United States can play an important role in reinforcing these positive messages. I thank you again for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And indeed, each of you are so important for the American people to promote the developments and stability in the Middle East by your input. And additionally, again, one of the highlights of my service was to be present at the White House when September 2020, when the President signed the agreements, the Abraham Accords. And it was just such a positive experience and a dream come true to see stability so beneficial to all the countries involved in the Middle East. And with that, President Greenway, stability and shared security interests in the historically volatile region is just one of the many ways Abraham Accords has benefited our partners in the region, and by extension, the United States. Abraham Accords countries have made significant commitments in trade, tourism, energy, and infrastructure investments. With U.S. leadership, expansion of the Accords would mean our allies working together in the interests of their countries to the detriment of the predatory Chinese Communist Party and Putin presence in the region. The Chinese Communist Party and Putin engage in debt trapping and expansionism disguised as diplomatic investment and pose a serious threat to the sovereignty and security of the countries that enter into the agreements. With that, President Greenway, what is your view of the strategic impact of the United States and our allies under the Abraham Accords working together to facilitate investment and trade rather than the Chinese Communist Party and Putin?
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. An excellent question, perhaps among the most vital. As I alluded to in my opening remarks, there is an opportunity to take advantage of this constellation of U.S. aligned partners and allies. And it is, in fact, at the expense of inroads that China is actively building within the region. And so it is, to a certain extent, a binary question. I would also, I think, remind all of us that the benefit derived from the Middle East has always been principally economic, whereas the evolution of the Carter Doctrine in '79 made the region important because of the necessity of U.S. imports of oil and gas from the region. Now, I would argue it's the criticality of those resources to support the global economy, not necessarily the United States. In either case, it's in our best interest to do so. Second, it's China's devoted interest to ensure they have adequate access to energy to sustain their economy and, hypothetically, would sustain any military excursion or operations. They are now dependent upon the Middle East for oil and gas. And that dependency creates a strategic imperative for them to maintain relationships. And so they have prioritized that. And most recently, President Xi managed to convene and hold quite an assemblage of regional heads of state in Riyadh during his recent visit. I would argue that if we don't prioritize our engagement, we would cede natural partners and allies and a critical strategic objective of our own and allow the Chinese to benefit greatly from it. The inverse, I think, is also true in that we do require stability of the global energy markets. Our partners and allies are well situated to help us do that. Secondly, important to look at the region as a transit point for all goods and services moving between Europe and Asia, and a good bit of it moving elsewhere. And that includes information and the global information network, which also transits the region. And so it's critical, I think, for us to safeguard both and to build on the partners and allies, of which many are Abraham Accords member countries, in order to safeguard our own interests, advance our own economic prosperity, and at the same time create constraints for China's advance in the region. It is an unnatural place for the Chinese to operate. We've been there for decades, generations, to build, as General Votel referenced, the trust required to do business and to gain, I think, progress in the region. The Chinese don't have that advantage. And so I think it is our advantage, certainly, and I think it's in our best interest to do so. And the Chinese recognize it. Most importantly, our partners and allies in the region eagerly want the United States to play this role as we once have. And so I think they would welcome our efforts on their behalf to integrate the region more effectively, and it would serve our interest and theirs.
Thank you very much. And General Votel, in November 2021, the U.S. Fifth Fleet coordinated the first joint military exercise between Bahrain, UAE, and Israel in the Red Sea. And President Greenway is actually correct. The United States has had such a association and affection for the people of the Persian Gulf, actually with the Kingdom of Bahrain, developing the first schools and hospitals there in 1895. And then in 1948, the location of the U.S. Naval Base, which was critical in the victory in the Cold War by having such a presence in Bahrain. And then flash forward, in South Carolina tomorrow, even Congresswoman Manning will be surprised. We are celebrating the delivery of F-16 Block 70s to the Kingdom of Bahrain by Lockheed Martin in Greenville, South Carolina, not the other one. And so, we're and how important that is to see this relationship, and and how it can come together within the next 24 hours. With that, what shared security concerns in the Red Sea, General, help drive the cooperation between Israel and, hey, our longtime and treasured ally of Saudi Arabia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an excellent question, and my response to you would be the proliferation of autonomous systems is a particular concern for our partners in the region. As many of you will recall, there was a very devastating attack on Abqaiq the Saudi Aramco facility here a number of months ago that was devastating to the economic prowess of this, and that attack continues to resonate not just in Saudi Arabia, but really across the region. So it is effectively addressing the proliferation of autonomous systems in the Gulf that is, I think, of primary concern, not just in the United States, but certainly to our partners. And addressing this, I think, would be a good way to build trust in the relationship, while also effectively addressing what is a rapidly growing and changing threat to not just Saudi Arabia, but others.
Thank you very much, and I regret my time is up, but Ambassador, I'd love to get your input later in regard to expanding Abraham Accords. Now we proceed to Congresswoman Kathy Manning of North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and indeed, both of our Greenvilles are lovely places. Thank you to our witnesses for your work and for sharing your expertise. General Votel, I want to thank you for sharing the impressions arising from your recent trip to the region. I'm sure as former commander of CENTCOM, you have particular insights into the region and the changes taking place. And I appreciate your emphasis on the urgency of moving forward to build on these transformative accords. I wonder if you could give us your thoughts about the most significant barriers to moving these accords forward and expanding on the work that's already being done.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I think, as I mentioned in my comments, I think there's really three that stand out, and then there are several others. Certainly, Iran and our policy towards Iran, our approach towards Iran, continues to be a topic that resonates with our partners in the region. They are looking for a clear articulation of what it is that we are trying to do with Iran and how we are going to bring them to a position where they are not a threat to their partners in the region. So I think Iran is a big one. I do think the Palestinian situation still does resonate in many of these countries, as you're well aware. This is a particular challenge in Saudi Arabia, I believe, because of their role as the custodian of the holy sites. And so this is more delicate for them, and as a result, it will take more time and more effort to work through that particular issue with the Saudis, and I think that will be a big piece. I also think areas that, as just in my most recent visit there, areas where we could move forward and which I think present some current obstacles right now, particularly with Saudi Arabia, is in investments, particularly investments in renewable energies and some of the other technologies that they are attempting to develop under kind of their diversification plan here. They are looking for the U.S. and other Western partners to come in and invest in these areas. And I don't think that has manifested itself in the way that they had hoped that it would at this particular time. So my point is that I think anything we can do to promote investments in the business community through our capital markets and other things, I think is important to demonstrate resolve here.
Thank you. So with regard to Iran, is it fair to say that you think those countries are looking to us, to the U.S., for our long-term strategy on dealing with Iran?
I think they are. I think they are looking for that. They are looking for the long-term strategy of how the United States continues to pursue its interests more broadly across the Middle East, and it's really important to do that. What the narrative that many of them repeat back to me as they hear about our shift to the Pacific and our focus on China, but what they don't hear as well is what we are doing to continue to preserve the interests that we retain in this region. So again, in this matter, clear articulation of our policies, of our approaches, the things we're going to do and the things we probably won't do are really important for our partners in the region.
And with regard to your second point about the Israeli-Palestinian issues, is there a way that you think we can use the positive energy of these accords to encourage the Abraham Accord countries to have a positive impact on improving relationships between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, I absolutely believe that's to be true. I think doing progress in one area, I think, it gives way to progress in other areas. I think it's important for people in the region to see the definitive progress and improvements that are being made as a result of the Abraham Accord process and the arrangements that are in place, because they give indications of areas where we can do this, where we can make progress in other areas. I don't know that it can directly address that issue, but the important part of the Abraham Accords is the fact that it provides a platform for dialogue. It provides a platform for interaction. It provides a way for the countries of the Gulf and Israel to have candid discussions and to move forward in critical areas that are of mutual interest.
Thank you so much. I have about 12 more questions, but in fairness, I will yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Kathy Manning. And indeed, we're so fortunate with scheduling. The first person who came to the Middle East Subcommittee meeting for 2023 was Congressman Brian Mast. He was here first, and so he gets all that credit, except for one thing. We're all bouncing different meetings, so he had to go to another meeting too. But he should be remembered as number one. To be here, and so, but then that shifts all the way from Florida to Indiana, of all things. Congressman Jim Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd just say that most of my questions have been answered, one of which was the Palestinian-Israeli relationship, and I think you've discussed that. So I'll pass, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman Baird, and we now proceed immediately to Congressman Brad Sherman of California.
Thank you. As to an opening comment, I don't think any of us trust the Iranian regime, but I do think we have to negotiate with them, just as Roosevelt negotiated with Stalin and Nixon negotiated with Mao. We are embracing the Abrahamic Accords, but we should remember that as to real diplomatic relations, it remains somewhat stalled, both as regards Sudan and Morocco. It looks like the Saudis, Ambassador, are pushing for U.S. cooperation with their supposedly peaceful nuclear program. And as I've pointed out to some friends of Israel, just because the Saudis are not Shiites does not mean that they are Zionists. And I saw a close relationship the United States had with the Shah, and every weapon the Shah had was then in the hands of the Ayatollahs. So we don't want to see we don't particularly want to see a nuclear-armed Saudi Arabia. The UAE entered the gold standard level of assurance that they wouldn't be using their peaceful program for military purposes. The Saudis seem very reluctant to do that. And of course, bin Salman has hinted, well, if the Iranians have a nuclear weapon, then we ought to have a nuclear weapon. Does Saudi Arabia want cooperation with a peaceful program with all the safeguards, or do they just want to be able to respond to the Iranian nuclear weapons program?
Thank you, Congressman. I think the Saudis obviously have made clear in every forum that they view Iran as their most significant threat. It's not only the nuclear program of Iran, it's also the proxies in Yemen and elsewhere who have attacked Saudi Arabia. And General Votel mentioned the attack on Abqaiq. And so they're rightfully concerned and rightfully seek the kind of assurances from the United States as their key security partner that would help them defend themselves.
Why are they reluctant to sign the safeguards their close neighbor has signed?
First of all, there's some rivalry between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. I think that is actually increasing over time, and there may be a factor of what the UAE wants, the Saudis want, and plus a little bit more. But it is also, I think, what one would expect almost at the beginning of any negotiation. The gold standard 1-2-3 agreement achieved with the United Arab Emirates took many years to negotiate. And so if the Saudis are serious about wanting U.S. civil nuclear technology cooperation as part part of a settlement, they would need to come to a serious negotiation about that.
I would just say that diplomatic relations and niceties can be reversed, governments can be overthrown, but nuclear weapons or nuclear weapons technology stays where it is. And thank God, while we did a lot for the military of the Shah, none of it was in the nuclear area. The ambassador of the UAE has stated the truth of the Abraham Accords was about preventing annexation. The reason it happened the way it happened. The reason it happened the way it happened. To prevent annexation. To prevent annexation. Are we? To what extent does some of the comments made more recently by the Netanyahu regime government about annexing parts of the West Bank conflict with either the letter or the spirit of the Abrahamic Accords?
Well, it is true that at the time that the Abraham Accords were signed, the Emirates did make clear that they expected what was then being discussed in Israel, which was a partial annexation of the West Bank, to be shelved, and there was such a commitment by Israel. So to have some Israeli members of the Israeli government speak about de facto annexation or to take actions that might be consistent with de facto annexation, even if it's called something else, obviously raises questions about whether that commitment is upheld. But I think more concerning is whether, of course, it also could mean the death of any possibility of a two-state solution, but how that development would influence and impact the possibility of future expansion of the Abraham Accords. The Saudis may not prioritize the Palestinian issue as their #1 priority in this, nor may other Arab states looking at this, and yet the polling we've seen about the relatively low popularity of the Accords suggests the Palestinian issue is at least part of the reason for that. And if we see two states receding over the cliff and annexation pushing it there, I think that will make it harder to achieve the goal we're all here to discuss.
And finally, I'll just point out that in addition to the Abrahamic Accords, the Biden administration's brokerage of an agreement with Lebanon on maritime and exploitation of the natural gas resources, and their negotiation with regard to Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Israel over the islets at the Gulf, at the mouth of the Gulf of Aqaba. They may not be Abrahamic, but they're important. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Congressman Sherman. And I'm happy you brought up about the Biden administration's success for the drilling in the Mediterranean, how important that's going to be for the economy of Lebanon, how beneficial it is for Israel, and to show how things connect. And that is that he didn't brag about it enough. The oil that is achieved by Israel is sent to Egypt, of all things, to be refined, to be sent to Italy to reduce any dependency on Putin. And so that was a tremendous achievement of offshore drilling in the Mediterranean. With that in mind, indeed, the very first person to be here for the very first Middle East, North Africa, Central Asia subcommittee is here, Congressman Brian Mast.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it. I want to start with just giving my own personal analysis on the last comments that you made about two-state. You mentioned it briefly, so I'm just going to mention my opinions on it. I think two-state should be left dead. In my opinion, it makes no sense to me that the United States of America work to make a state out of an entity that would have to immediately be labeled as a terror state and a state that we would immediately in Congress begin coming up with sanctions for. So personally, that's my analysis of the situation. My question goes to you, General, and it's about what was spoken about, the communication that's taking place, the diplomacy that's taking place, and stability that can take place between different entities. But I want to ask if the Abraham Accords are leading to communication in another place. Right? We have the Abraham Accords taking place. We have a de facto separation between Gaza and the West Bank for 2 decades, let's say. It's well assumed by many that if there were to be a real election held, that Hamas would win a popular election across those 2 de facto areas. Are the Abraham Accords resulting in an increased communication between Gaza and the West Bank to one way or another change that relationship from de facto separation to officially separated, or somehow united under the PA, or united under Hamas, or in some other ways? Is it resulting in that over there?
Congressman, to be very truthful with you, I'm not sure I can make a conclusion one way or the other on that. Some of the other panelists may be in a better position to comment on that. I think tangentially it could have some influence, frankly, in terms of uniting some folks in those particular areas around certain issues. So I think there may be some tangential issues, but in terms of something more substantive in influence, and I'm not sure. I haven't seen that, and I may not be the best person to conclude that.
Thank you, John. And I don't know that we would necessarily see it or that it would be evident to us, but I would certainly welcome the opinions from both of you as well about if you're seeing that. That's something I'm just particularly curious about, because I think is wherever people stand on wanting to see two-state or not two-state, or however they see peace, long-lasting peace and stability in that region taking place, that's something that has to be addressed, is that separation of those two entities. And I don't see it being looked at a lot, so I'd be curious to know y'all's analysis as well.
Thanks, Congressman. I would say that the direct answer to your question is I don't think that's the case now. I think the perspective of the Accords members before and after the agreement was that they could better contribute to setting conditions for an eventual brokered settlement, whatever that might be, by being a member of the Accords and having normalized diplomatic relations with Israel. And they point to both Egypt and Jordan as examples of this, where their influence over Israel, positive and negative, would contribute to an ultimate resolution, one that they would frankly admit is not currently within sight. And I think there's merit to that argument. Second is I think there's a material way for them to contribute to the conversation and to set conditions. And I think that that has probably not been exploited to the degree to which it could. And one of the ways in which I mentioned up front in my opening remarks, and one of the ways we established early on with the Accords, was a fund to allow Accord member countries to contribute to infrastructure investment within the territories that was both acceptable to Israel and to the Palestinians and to the benefit of both. And I think there is ample opportunity for that to continue to occur while we're waiting for the resolution of a more difficult political question.
Thank you, sir.
Congressman, I think the attitude of the Palestinian Authority to the Abraham Accords has been very disappointing. They, of course, have called it a betrayal and essentially boycotted it. Of course, Hamas, that rules Gaza, is a terrorist organization that rejects Israel's existence. They're obviously not going to be a party. I do think there are different views among the Palestinian people, a younger generation, business people, people who are open to the idea that Palestinians could benefit and contribute if they were participating in these dialogues. What I hope is that we will see, we try to do this in our programs, but I think the Arab states that have normalized with Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco in particular, are well positioned to be conveners in forums where both Israelis and Palestinians participate, look for ways to cooperate, develop some personal relationships, lower suspicion. That may not get us to the resolution that I would like to see of a two-state solution or any resolution of the conflict, but it would certainly lower the barriers to an eventual resumption of negotiations and some kind of resolution by developing this. I think these Arab states have more influence in that arena than they may realize they do, and that we should encourage them to use it.
I appreciate you all taking the time to testify today, and I yield no time back because I have no time left.
Thank you very much, Congressman Brian Mast. And we now proceed to former Chairman David Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate you on your first hearing as chairman of this important committee, and thank the witnesses for being with us today and for your testimony. I think we all recognize that the Abraham Accords was really an important and historic breakthrough on building and maintaining peace in the Middle East through new and extended regional cooperation. And as we acknowledge the successes of these agreements, I'm really optimistic about the opportunity that lies ahead to build on these historic achievements. Additional engagement and partnerships will allow for cooperation on key issues which you've discussed. And I, of course, am looking forward to ways in which Congress can help support efforts to deepen and broaden the Abraham Accords and a better future for all in the region. As you mentioned, Ambassador Shapiro, one of the main impediments to expanding the Abraham Accords has been the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Oman have all indicated to various extents their interest in stabilizing relations with Israel, but not without significant steps towards peace. And so what I'm wondering is if you have recommendations on the kinds of things that we might be suggesting to our State Department in these conversations that would provide some engagement with the Palestinians, some benefits, so they would see the Abraham Accords is not only bringing more peace and stability to the region, but actual benefits to them.
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. The kinds of projects that have already been announced, for example, the Prosperity Green and Prosperity Blue solar energy for desalinated water exchange between Jordan and Israel, financed by the United Arab Emirates, is a very good example of a project that could have and should, I think, include the Palestinians. They're obviously in the same geographic area. They have similar needs for energy and water. They could be a contributor, but also a beneficiary of that and 10 other joint projects like it. I discussed the idea that the UAE can be a convener of the kinds of exchanges where Israelis and Palestinians outside their own immediate environment can actually meet with their mutual Arab partners to do business deals, to do development projects, do education initiatives. And just by doing that, it shows that there is something to be gained for Palestinians by contributing. It's not going to answer all of their immediate needs. It's not going to start a negotiation tomorrow, and certainly the lack of trust, almost total lack of trust, between Israeli and Palestinian leaders is a big barrier. We're not going to overcome that tomorrow. But I do think those parties with U.S. sponsorship and organization can draw Palestinians into these dialogues with Israelis and with their other Arab partners and change that dynamic rather dramatically.
Thank you. And I think we all recognize this past year has been one of the deadliest periods of violence in the West Bank in nearly 2 decades. And I'm wondering whether you, General, or you, Ambassador, or President Greenway, have thoughts on whether or not the partners to the Abraham Accords have been helpful, and can they be helpful in terms of assisting and responding to some of the violence and brokering some kinds of agreements because of their new positions as members of the Abraham Accords. Has that proved useful, or has that not really spilled over into some of these issues with respect to settlement expansion?
Okay. You know, the UAE is struggling with this. Yeah. They're a member of the UN Security Council. They have several times in the last 2 or 3 months brought complaints on behalf of other Arab countries to the UN Security Council about statements or actions by Israel in the West Bank. I don't think they've been as consistently critical as I think they should be of Palestinian terrorist attacks that take the lives of Israelis, or indeed of Palestinian Authority salaries paid to terrorists. But again, it's a demonstration that they are positioned to play a role as both a supporter of both. They're now friends with Israel, and nobody would want them to withhold any of that, but also friends and partners of the Palestinians. They can be supporters, they can be coaches, they can put some positive pressure on each side to avoid the things that make it harder, or they keep the situation on the ground very tense, or make it harder to resume negotiations. I'd like to see them step more into that role. Obviously, that should be done in coordination with the United States.
Congressman, I completely agree with the Ambassador. I think the key point here is that the maturing of the Abraham Accord relationships will really give the opportunity for trustful communication between the partners in the arrangement. That does take time, frankly. I think you're seeing some of that. People are treading lightly, but over time, continuing to invest in this, I think it does provide a good platform for addressing really sensitive issues like you raised.
Thank you so much. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Cicilline. We now proceed to Congressman Rich McCormick of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make this quick because each one of you brings such a wealth of knowledge. I'm really excited about this. I'm going to start with General, if you don't mind. I2U2, are you familiar with the I2U2?
I'm not sure that
with India, Israel, United States, and UAE, the partnership they have. Sharing information, sharing economy, and just kind of thinking outside the box with what we had with Abraham, and thinking outside even the regional benefit of the Abraham. As we tie in other places, you have a big country like Indonesia, which is primarily Muslim, and who also has the potential to come in and be a part of this greater peace process. What do you think about expanding this outside of the direct region?
I think it's extraordinarily important in my view. Again, I think the benefit of these types of accords, these types of arrangements, is they promote dialogue and they promote communication between partners. And I think whenever you're doing that, you're reducing risk for things happening. So I'm very, very supportive. I understand Indonesia is one of the countries that has been most engaged to date in some of the expansion. So I think that's a positive thing. That said, the priority needs to remain in the Middle East. That's
Absolutely.
Where the original problem really exists.
Perfect, and I agree with you. Power in numbers, especially with such a large population of the Muslim community coming on board in that peace process. Honorable Mr. Greenway, by the way, thank you for both of your services too, by the way, as fellow military brothers in arms. When we talk about the second largest Shia population in the world next to Iran being in Azerbaijan, and having Russia distracted with a war where they've basically withdrawn from the Armenian region, provides a real neat opportunity, I think, to kind of go in there and establish this presence. What are the holdups or what are the pros and cons, do you think, to including Azerbaijan, and how could we get them folded in quickly while Russia is distracted?
Thank you, Congressman. Excellent question. And your preceding one was, I think, as well. I think that, well, first, Azerbaijan already has a strong relationship with Israel, and so membership of the Accords will be more formal and symbolic than substantive because of the relationship they already enjoy. To your broader point on whether there is a room for us to pull Azerbaijan, I would argue other Central Asian states more closely within the fold at the expense of Russia and China, which I think would be their strong preference. I think there is, in fact, an opportunity for us to do exactly that. And I think the time is certainly ripe for it. And we would, I think, increase our flexibility and also economic prosperity for ourselves and also for the region. The benefit of looking outside the Middle East, particularly the Middle East, North Africa, to Asia and to the Central Asian states, is the economic benefit that ties them together, increases the bond then endures. So I think any effort we can make along those lines would be beneficial.
That's perfect, and I always stress that economic tie, which kind of goes to I2U2 and with the other, especially you mentioned Azerbaijan's strong economic ties to Israel, especially with energy, so that's what I'm looking for. Ambassador, I'm going to shift back to more local concerns. You mentioned in your opening remarks the deteriorating relationship between Israel and Palestine. I've been in the military for over 30 years, or around the military for over 30 years. It always seemed bad to me. I don't see how we can deteriorate from bad to bad. I'm just curious what you mean by that. I mean, it always seems like we kind of vacillate, but we never really get good. So I don't understand what you mean by deteriorating. What specifically do you mean? I mean, is there a path for, it seems like there's a vested interest since a certain guy came along to divide us. People actually make a profit off of dividing us. And I don't know how we overcome that other than to tie them in somehow economically. One time it seemed like they were kind of the blue-collar workers. We had a pretty good relationship, pretty economically sound model for that particular demographic to succeed, and now that's kind of gone by the wayside.
Congressman, it's obviously a situation that does go through ups and downs and various cycles. I don't think anyone would dispute that the recent months have seen a spike in violence, a number of deadly terrorist attacks by Palestinian terrorists against Israeli citizens, a number of operations the Israeli military has undertaken to go after those who are responsible for those attacks, and sometimes civilians are wounded in those or killed in those operations.
I get your point. I'm sorry, I'm almost out of time. What do you think if we, once again, I think Iran is, if you take away the big brother, the person who's kind of supplying the motivation, the arms behind it, is there a way to divide them from that and cut off that supply that would benefit this process?
I think the best opportunity, and I'm not saying that anybody can promise that this is a guarantee of success, but to get Palestinians who have been drawn toward violent extremism, drawn toward the sponsors who are the providers of that kind of weaponry, and I don't mean Hamas, who are ideologically committed to Israel's destruction. I mean other Palestinians who have in the past at least considered what would it look like to live alongside Israel in a two-state solution, would be to, first of all, show some improved conditions on the ground by economic and security upgrades, and second of all, to show that there is a horizon, a path, a diplomatic pathway that could get back to that outcome if they're willing, and obviously if Israel is also willing to engage in that diplomatic process. As long as it looks absolutely hopeless from the Palestinian perspective that there will ever be any end, then I suspect it will be harder for us to steer more Palestinians away from that path, as we absolutely should be trying to do.
Apologize for going over time.
And thank you very much, Congressman Rich Burchett. We now proceed to to Rich McCormick. And we now, Congressman Tim Burchett of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Shapiro, you know, we're quick to be critical of anti-Semitism overseas, and we should. We've got it here, but of course, overseas, it's been thousands of years before we were even a country. I'm wondering, what can the Abraham Accords do to help put a stop to some of it?
Thank you, Congressman. It's an excellent question and something I'm quite excited about. In December, our N7 initiative hosted a conference in Morocco on education and coexistence, and we brought together from 8 countries, Israel and 7 Arab countries, educators and NGOs involved in coexistence and interfaith work, including a number of Arab activists in Morocco and in the UAE and in Bahrain who are working to educate their own populations against anti-Semitic narratives that have been present in their societies or their education systems for far too long, for understanding the common roots of Judaism and Islam and the times during history when Jews and Muslims have lived peacefully alongside each other. There's a lot of pride in that, particularly in Morocco, where the Jewish community has been a major part of Moroccan society for centuries. So I think there are initiatives underway. There's Holocaust education now being brought into their school systems, at least the UAE and Morocco, for the first time. So there's significant progress, and all of this is made possible by the dialogues and the cross pollination discussions that were only really started after the Abraham Accords came into being.
Would you say that leadership sometimes I find that they want to stay in power, and that seems to be the key. And as long as Jews and Muslims and Christians are all fighting, it keeps the same old bunch of dirtbags in power. And would you say that's a safe assumption?
I think there are many examples of that dynamic throughout history.
Dirtbags is probably not in your diplomatic dossier, but it is in mine. So
I think, Congressman, you can find many examples of that dynamic throughout history.
All right. I'll take that as a yes. Mr. Greenway, Saudi Arabia's interest to engage publicly with Israel affects other countries that might be interested in do you feel like they're interested in normalizing those relations?
Thanks for the question, Congressman. We've had a number of conversations with our Saudi partners while we were negotiating the Abraham Accords, before and since. I would say first that public discussions about negotiations tend to increase negotiating leverage of one or more parties, usually becomes detrimental. It's why the accords themselves were never disclosed or announced before they were concluded. So I think any public discussion usually has a less than productive impact on it. My private and conversations and what has publicly, I think, generally concords with the conclusion that this is really about the Riyadh-Washington relationship and has a lot less to do with the relationship with Israel. And on sound footing, I think there's room to proceed. I think ultimately it is in our interests, the United States' best interest. I think it's certainly within Israel's best interest. I think it's also within the kingdom's best interest. But I do think that we'd have to repair the relationship and build on a sounder footing in order to proceed. Ultimately, I do think it's about integrating our partners and allies in the region, which I think they desperately want. And I do think that there's certainly room to address legitimate security concerns. And into previous comments about the Saudi discussion and potential requirement to pursue civil nuclear cooperation, I think the general point there is they don't want to see a standard upheld by the United States that is one way for Tehran and another way for partners and allies in the region. And I think they would be comfortable with the gold standard 123 agreement that saw the construction of Baraka in the UAE, ultimately, provided that the United States did not enable a wholesale civil and military nuclear program in Tehran.
Do you think there's any additional measures that need to be taken to support peace besides those that you mentioned?
Well, I think there certainly are. And again, I think providing for our security and stability in the region and our partners and allies would demonstrate exactly that level of commitment. I think the right approach on Tehran as the shared upon and agreed upon principal threat to peace and stability in the region would go a long way towards doing that. So I think if we make movement in that direction, I think we'll find partners moving with us.
What do you think America sees by expanding these accords? What benefits quickly?
The first is to constrain China's ambitions globally. The second is to secure global markets upon which we're dependent and the principal beneficiary. And the third would be to see a stability in a region that all too often has required a huge expenditure from the United States to redress.
Those are three good things. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the remaining 8 seconds.
And thank you, Congressman Tim Burcham. We appreciate your very accurate terminology, whatever you use. So this is correct. With this, we're very fortunate to have Congressman Michael Lawler from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for testifying today. Ambassador Shapiro, you made a note in your remarks of the legislation that Congressman Torres and I have introduced to create a special envoy specifically for the Abraham Accords. Why do you believe that would be an effective tool, if you will, to help ensure the stability and long-term success of the Abraham Accords?
Thank you, Congressman. I think when administrations elevate their focus on particular areas and appointments of that nature, special envoy that can have other titles, can help do that. It demonstrates a very significant commitment that gets the attention of our foreign partners, obviously those in the region, those who have already made their decision to normalize with Israel and the additional steps that we seek to have them deepen those conversations, those states that have not yet normalized relations, and there's a focal point for discussions with those countries, and even for external partners. Mr. McCormick mentioned the I2U2 initiative that India has constructively contributed to. Well, we have a lot of other U.S. partners in Europe, in Asia, that also could be contributors, but somebody needs to sort of corral that, somebody needs to organize that, somebody needs to be the focal point. And then within our own government, I mentioned it's not just the State Department, it's not just the Defense Department that has to do this. There's numerous other cabinet departments that have something to contribute. But again, having a focal point for organizing all of that effort and even the effort of external non-government entities that want to contribute, I think is made easier when you have that sort of focal point.
So obviously in 2020, the Abraham Accords were entered into with the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. They've somewhat, I don't want to say stalled, but obviously I think there was obviously a change in administration here, and there are other events that have happened in the world. Obviously, the Russian invasion of Ukraine being one of them. It is your belief that whether it's a special envoy or some sort of heightened position, that would help maybe continue to push this forward towards success. I mean, we're seeing, other countries allowing Israeli airlines to operate and come into their airspace, which certainly I think is a positive step towards more normalized relations. But you agree that ultimately having this type of position or something similar would help advance the ball here?
I do. I want to give full credit to the Biden administration. I think they have invested in this. I think the Negev Summit and the resulting Negev Forum and the working groups that have met. I think you've mentioned the opening of airspace, first in Saudi Arabia, now in Oman, that facilitates much shorter flights between Israel and the Far East. Some of the other visits and the I2U2 and some of the other engagements that the United States has helped sponsor all result from good work, good diplomatic work. But again, you can do even more when you have a high-level focal point within our own government and dealing with foreign governments.
What additional countries would you, and just if you could name them, not just in the interest of time, but what additional countries would you like to see ideally enter into the Abraham Accords?
Of course, Saudi Arabia is the biggest prize, but probably one of the most difficult. I think Oman, Mauritania, Qatar, and Kuwait are all possibilities. And outside of the region, Indonesia, Somalia, Niger, and Malaysia are also legitimate candidates.
Okay. Lastly, and you're somewhat uniquely positioned on this, given both your role as former ambassador to Israel, but also your work as a consultant with respect to Iran. How do you think the administration's approach towards Iran and their efforts as recently as last year to restart the Iran nuclear deal impact the Abraham Accords and the potential of other countries like Saudi Arabia to really engage with Israel?
Well, you know, one thing Israel and a number of these Arab partners, those that have normalized, those have not, agree on is that they disagree with the United States. They disagreed at the time the JCPOA was signed, and they disagreed with the Biden administration's approach. But I think that to try to re-enter it. But I think that ship has largely sailed. I don't see an opportunity to go back into that deal. Things that were possible or necessary in order to do it, or I don't think are possible anymore in light of Iran's oppression of its own people in the protests and arming of Russia in the war in Ukraine. So I think we're in a new phase.
Just so I'm clear, is it your position that the United States should not try to restart?
I don't think it's even an option at this point. I think we're in a new phase where deterrence, and that's something that the United States, Israel, and a lot of these Arab partners can agree on, is going to be a central portion, a central component of a new Iran policy, obviously drawing certain lines about things that Iran might do, hopefully will not do, but if they would do, would draw a response of one kind or another from one or a coalition of these partners. So I think there's actually a new opportunity, mostly because of Iran's behavior and Iran's refusal to try to return to that agreement and then do all of these other destabilizing things to coalesce a more unified U.S. and regional policy to deal with Iran.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the additional time.
And thank you very much, Congressman Michael Lawler. And also, I'm really grateful that we have the co-chairman of the Bulgaria caucus here, Congressman Brad Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to personally thank you for allowing me to join the committee hearing this morning. I want to thank our witnesses, first and foremost, for your service to our nation, all three of you in different ways. We are grateful to you as a country, and for your time here and your commitment to the Abraham Accords. I have the privilege of being one of the co-founders and co-chairs of the bipartisan, bicameral Abraham Accords caucus, and I think that is a reflection of what we do, what you do, in this fundamental belief that the Abraham Accord caucus are one of the most bright things we see coming out of the Middle East. It is something that we as a nation should be extraordinarily proud of, being the facilitator of this Accords a couple of years ago, and something that we need to be completely committed to. As you have touched on, we need to make sure that we are deepening the roots of the Accords in the countries that have signed the Accords today, while at the same time, I would argue, working to help it branch out in two ways that you've touched on. One, bring more countries in. Saudi Arabia obviously would be very welcome. But Ambassador Shapiro, as you touched on, reaching out to Europe, building relationships with Asia, and making sure that this becomes a centerpiece of diplomacy and opportunity. In that vein, I think one of the challenges we face is demonstrating the value of the Abraham Accords, first to the decision makers in the region and around, but also critically to the people living in these countries, that they see the benefits of the Accords, and to demonstrate U.S. commitment to the region and through it, that commitment to the Accords. So I'll start with you, Ambassador Shapiro. How do we work to make sure that the people living in the region see the value of the Accords, and that they see the U.S. commitment to the region and to the Abraham Accords itself?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman. The negative forum obviously is one effort to try to come up with projects and proposals that will go beyond the leadership level but show benefit to the public in the different sectors: energy, health, water, and food, et cetera. The problem is the Negative Forum is a consensus organization. It moves very slowly. It takes time for the ministers to meet again and ratified work done at the working level. And so there's a lot of proposals, but very little has actually been implemented. Those things that have been implemented haven't been region-wide. They've been sort of between individual countries. UAE-Israel Free Trade Agreement. I mentioned the Prosperity Green and Blue Israel-Jordan-UAE Agreement. We're, as I said, at the Atlantic Council trying the N7 initiative to bring together a track 2 or track 1.5 component to run parallel to the Negative Forum so that a broader community of experts can build a network, develop ideas and, for projects that really are focused precisely on that. How does a citizen of one of these countries feel that they have a new educational opportunity, a new better health care, better access to water and food security than they did before and because of these agreements. So there's a number of ways. It requires a lot of investment by expertise. It requires money, of course, some from government, some from private or foundation or philanthropic entities. But that really needs to be the focus going forward.
General Votel, let me turn to you. And just to refresh, we actually spoke about 1.5 years ago, mutual friend Al Goldstein, so it's good to see you here. But I'd love to have your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to build a little bit on that, I think one of the most important things that could take place is the promotion of people-to-people exchanges and contact between the countries. Obviously, tourism provides an opportunity for this, but so does exchanges for education purposes, for business purposes, for healthcare, for technology exchanges. I think these are extraordinarily important, and people in each of the countries who are parties to the agreement will begin to see this. And so I think this idea of promoting people-to-people exchanges, certainly there's a series of exercises and other things that are taking place in the Gulf and in the air over the Gulf and in a variety of areas. A demonstration of an effective defense against a threat certainly I think is something that needs to be emphasized in the region, and again, people will begin to see that.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Greenway, I'll give you the last word.
Appreciate it, Congressman. Excellent question. I think we spend a lot of our time on implementation. There have been over 260 agreements between the Accord member countries, and we spend most of our time connecting ministries, departments, agencies, public and private institutions to execute these. Academic exchanges, including Scholars and Fellows Program, athletic events, which will encompass some of the first international Abraham Accords-based international athletic events this year, an agricultural initiative between the Accord member countries actually putting shovels in the ground in Sudan this year, expanding cross-border trade by expanding the infrastructure, and as you mentioned earlier, bringing external support to this. We've worked hard to build caucuses in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Brussels, in Hungary just this past week, and soon we hope in other countries as well, and in Asia, in order to leverage that support. So implementation and follow-through on agreements that already been achieved, I think will go a long way towards cementing the ties, demonstrating the benefit to people, and encouraging others to join.
Great, thank you. And let me just emphasize, I agree with everything you said. General Votel, you talked about people-to-people. We've had the chance here with the caucus to meet with the ambassadors from the Abraham Accords countries, Israel, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. It's very important. And if I can, Mr. Chairman, we're working to try to get a trip to the Abraham Accords country, and would love to try to work with you on that as well. And with that, I yield back.
And thank you, Chairman, co-chair of the Abraham Accord Caucus, you've had so many chairmanships, it's hard to keep them straight. But I just want to, that's terrific. And in fact, you're doing so good, we're going to have a second round. And when we have such distinguished individuals here, and so we'd like to proceed, including Chairman Schneider. So we, at this time, Ambassador Shapiro, the normalization of relations between Israel and UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan have been an historic accomplishment during the Trump administration, benefiting all of the Abraham Accords countries and the United States. At this point, what roadblocks might be stopping more Arab countries from joining the Abraham Accords? And if you could review again the benefits that signatories have made since normalizing relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The benefits, I think, are flowing on a regular basis. There are already people-to-people exchanges that General Votel mentioned, although room for vast expansion of those. They're the beginnings of educational exchanges, Israeli students studying at Arab universities and vice versa. There's room to dramatically expand that as well. There is a free trade agreement between the UAE and Israel, and a dramatic increase in bilateral trade between them, and negotiations on an Israel-Bahrain agreement. And then, of course, there are the various things that those governments sought from the United States. Again, something that the United States has always done in Arab-Israeli peacemaking, which is make a contribution. The UAE sought a particular weapon system. It hasn't actually followed through on that, but that was a part of that agreement. Morocco got the recognition of Western Sahara. So they, of course, seek something in their own interest in addition to what they get out of the relationship with Israel. I think other countries, of course, look at some of those negotiations and they look for the right moment. They look for the question of whether they, too, would be in a bargaining situation with the United States. I think we need to expect that with any country that comes forward. They also, I think, look for the moment when they would find this to be something they could most easily absorb in their own political systems. That's where the tensions between Israelis and Palestinians that have increased have also, I think, been have the potential to slow additional countries from coming into the fold.
Thank you very much. And indeed, President Greenway, it's just been awesome to see the agreement between Lebanon and Israel. I can't even visualize how important that is for the offshore drilling of oil and natural gas, environmentally sound, how important it is to back up a country that should be great, but it's not, is Lebanon. It has been great in terms of economic opportunity and achievement, but the economic stability that can be achieved by the sale of oil and gas. And then how extraordinary to put together the benefit to Israel, and then the thought that this would tie directly to Egypt for the refining, and then tie to Italy for the export, and also to have an impact on war criminal Putin. And so, again, the offshore drilling, I was hoping to get more attention, what an achievement that is, because what you have, Lebanon wins, Israel wins, Egypt wins, Italy wins, war criminal Putin loses. Are there any other initiatives that you see that, it'll be hard to replicate that, but are there any other economic achievements that could be achieved between the countries of the Middle East?
Well, you bring up, I think, one of the most important areas, Chairman, and that is energy cooperation. And I think we haven't yet seen the full potential of this. And so while cooperation between parties you've already mentioned, chiefly Israel and Egypt in this case, but others within the Mediterranean, can, I think, offset and replace the loss of Russian gas. Some 43% of Europe's energy requirements were met previously by Russia. That loss has not been replaced. There isn't yet infrastructure plans in place to offset it completely. The United States, Norway, and others, I think, have taken steps, but there is not yet a mid to long-term plan in place. This is where we judge the Abraham Accord countries, including Israel, Egypt, and other partners, could in fact offset, if not replace, the loss of Russian gas to Europe. And I think the U.S. can play a critical role in doing it. The plans previously existed, but the business model to require the infrastructure investment didn't until Russia invaded Ukraine. And at that point, it then becomes perfectly reasonable. But it will take time, effort, and to do. It will be enormous revenue generator for the participant countries. It will also, again, strategically align our partners to one another and not dependent upon an adversary. So we can't emphasize the enormous potential of this too much, but there's a lot of work to be done.
Well, it's just exciting to see the offshore drilling, the consequence that could be expanded to pipelines to Greece, Bulgaria, Romania, to the Western Balkans, all to provide for energy independence for that region of southeastern Europe. And so I yield back, and now we have Congresswoman Kathy Manning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you again to our witnesses for sharing your time and your expertise. So there are two other countries in the immediate region that we have barely mentioned, and Mr. Chairman just mentioned Lebanon, which sadly is on the verge of becoming a failed state, and we haven't even talked about Syria, which is the source of countless problems in the region. So I'm wondering, Is there any way that the Abraham Accords countries working together can have any positive impact on either of those countries? I saw a smile on Ambassador Shapiro's face. I don't know if that meant you were hoping someone else would answer the question, or you would like to take it on.
Well, I think I think it's an excellent question, Congresswoman, and I think the security and defense cooperation between Israel and other countries in the region, particularly those that are involved in this, I think does increase the opportunity to in place measures that can have an impact on Iran's ability to move their lethal resources closer to Israel. That's very indirect right now. But I think when we look at some of the initiatives that are being undertaken right now by U.S. Central Command with a very excellent commander of trying to, create a series of sensors and drones and all backed by artificial intelligence to really understand what is happening in the Gulf, that gives us the opportunity to better control the maritime movement of lethal aid. The same thing could apply to the air. These things, I think, they're indirect at this point, but they could have the opportunity to have an impact on that. I think what's most important, I think, that I'm trying to emphasize to you is that showing a united front and then demonstrating coherent approaches to security and defense in the region can address that situation and particularly with respect to some of the Iranian malign influence that plays out in Syria and affects Israel and others in the region as well.
Thank you. So let me ask this question. What can we be doing in Congress to support and foster the expansion of the Abraham Accords? You've talked about so many ways these interaction of these countries and the interaction of these transformative and can be even more transformative for the region. What can we in Congress be doing to be supportive? And I'd actually ask each of you to answer that. And Ambassador Shapiro, would you mind starting?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. I think, that, first of all, the establishment of the Abraham Accords caucuses in and of itself demonstrates that this is a cause that deserves bipartisan, sustained investment and support rather than being the province of one party or one administration. And I think that's very, very important. The visits that a number of members have already made, and Congressman Schneider referenced additional visits that will come, are an opportunity to go and talk directly to those leaders and people and explain why it is that the United States sees its own interests and the interests of its partners served by doing this. And then, as I also indicated, there's more than just the negotiations that the State Department sponsors, more than just the security cooperation that the Defense Department and the military lead on. Almost every department of the U.S. government has an international affairs program, has something to bring to it, things as diverse as USTR's expertise on trade negotiations, the U.S. Holocaust Memorials Museum's ability to bring curriculum on Holocaust education, the Center for Disease Control's ability to share, provide information and networks for sharing about future pandemics. These are just few examples, but every member of Congress sits on a committee and has oversight over, has jurisdiction over a department that could be encouraged and maybe even more than encouraged and then funded to participate in this. And kind of this whole of government approach, I think, would be the right way to think about how the Congress can make its biggest contribution.
Wonderful. Mr. Schneider, you have your charge. And Mr. Greenway, would you add to that?
Yes, Congressman, happy to. It already mentioned energy cooperation, the free trade area, and like Ambassador Shapiro would allow the formation of the caucus in both House and Senate. I would say that the United States allocates a fair amount of money towards Middle East peace more broadly and has for many decades. And I would say no need to look at additional appropriations, but perhaps ensuring those that currently exist could encompass the Abraham Accords. So we spend a lot of money on supporting programs that nominally support peace between Israel and Palestine and Israel and its neighbors, but we don't allocate resources towards it. So perhaps looking at existing legislation and modifying it to encompass the accords so that we could encourage and support the actual peace that's manifest in front of us. Second is, I think, providing capabilities to our partners. enables them, one, to defend themselves more appropriately and reduces the burden on us. So ultimately, I think we need to get to a point where we're more comfortable with accelerating the provision of capabilities to our partners, and it'll send exactly the right message to them. But I would emphasize that trade and energy and the economic argument does provide for a strong rationale. If we want them to get along, they're going to have to trade with each other to the point where they'll defend that trade relationship.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Manning, and I want to thank you for raising, indeed, there's so many countries that need to be addressed, and Lebanon, Syria, as we're thinking of the tremendous success, the Kingdom of Jordan, and then our hopes for the people of Iraq, our appreciation of the women of Iran, and then West Balkans, when you think of countries that have come to life, Albania, North Macedonia, and then you go to Serbia. What great opportunity for stability in a region that was unimaginable. And so with that, I want to proceed, and our last questioner is going to be, of course, somebody extremely important, because he's the Abraham Accords co-chairman, Brad Schneider.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And General Votel, let me go back to what you put in your opening remarks, but the importance of U.S. leadership and the question I asked earlier, the demonstration of U.S. commitment to the region. And start with you, but I'll ask the whole panel. What should we be doing to demonstrate our commitment and leadership in the region? And I'll give one leading aspect to it, the idea of coordinated defense, sharing of information, collaboration across systems.
Yeah, thank you, Congressman, or Mr. Chairman. These are areas in which we have extraordinary expertise within our military and across all services. And so, in helping our partners develop better shared awareness systems, being able to share information among themselves, as we have been able to do very effectively, I think, is one of the ways that we can help our partners become more resilient and more self-reliant in looking after their own defense. So, sharing our lessons learned, sharing our practices, putting our leaders into a place where they can advocate for these types of approaches, I think are really important. I also think an area where we could provide some additional help is in the area of security cooperation. Candid discussions with our partners about the capabilities that they need and should be acquiring, I think, are extraordinarily important. And this, I think, has been a long-time challenge in the region. And so this is an area where we can actually demonstrate some leadership. And then finally, just the ability for us to bring people together, to be a convener. We don't have to drive the whole conversation, but the fact of the matter is, in the Middle East, when the United States speaks, it carries weight, and our leaders, like the CENTCOM commander or our various ambassadors or others, really do have that level of credibility that they can bring people together to talk about the difficult challenges. So this idea of a convener, I think, is a really important way for us to demonstrate our leadership.
Great, thank you. Ms. Greenway.
Thank you, Congressman. I would say, first, it's come up before that if we don't, I think, have some common agreement on how to approach the threat from Iran, it's going to be difficult to make progress across a number of other fronts, including security cooperation. We've talked about a number of issues today, but I can't overemphasize the fact that this is the most pressing threat to all of them. What happens in the Israel-Palestine conflict matters to them, but not nearly to the point in which the immediate threat to their very survival coming from Tehran today is, and the desperate need for U.S. leadership in the response to that threat. That is a huge opportunity, and I agree with Ambassador Shapiro that it seemed that the ship has sailed. It's an opportunity then for us, I think, to stake a claim in partnership with our allies in the region, and that would allow us to convene from a position of strength, which I think they all and we want. Second, I would say our support for Israel is critically important during this time. The rest of the region watches this incredibly closely. They can't be more pro-Israel than we are. That doesn't mean unequivocal or without conditions. It does mean if there's daylight between the capitals, there'll be huge daylight between their capitals. Second, I would say that building support abroad, which we've talked about, actually matters a great deal and adds additional leverage and other partners in this expanding and supporting the Accords. And last, I would say they always ask this question. We ask them to commit resources towards each other and toward the region. They ask us, what have we committed to the Abraham Accords? And the answer to that question is we really haven't at all. And I think that there's room for us to do it. And I'm not saying that we need to find resources. I'm saying we could look at existing resources and apply them more effectively to support the Accords. And that, to date, has not yet occurred.
Okay, thank you. And I'll give you the last word, Ambassador Shapiro. Before I give it to you, I do want to go back to a conversation earlier where you were asked about two states. And I don't think anyone is talking about a two-state solution on the horizon. It is not going to be a second state where it is a terrorist state that is a non-starter. And as you said, Mr. Greenway, the greatest threat, the existential threat, is a nuclear Iran. And I agree that the ship has sailed on past agreements. We need to make sure Iran understands that we're looking forward and we'll never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. But we are also looking at a place where we're pursuing peace in the region. So, our Ambassador Shapiro, I give you the last word.
Thank you, Congressman. I think the narrative that sometimes pervades in the region of a U.S. withdrawal or U.S. absence or U.S. pivoting to other regions is rather exaggerated. It is true, of course, that 3 consecutive presidents of very different characters and administrations have all demonstrated different ways. The American people are not looking for new major military entanglements in the region, but we're still there. CENTCOM is still the main convener and still the main partner for all these countries, Israel now involved in it. I think President Biden made a very courageous decision and the right decision to travel to the region last summer, knowing he'd get some criticism for going and meeting with the Saudis, but as a way of indicating to all of these countries that we may have had some disagreements and we may have at times different views about what the right approach is on a given problem, but the United States is committed to that partnership, is committed to ensuring that the partners have the ability to defend themselves, but also that we are there as an ultimate backstop. But then, of course, we also have expectations that they will act in ways that are consistent with core U.S. interests when it comes to China, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to oil markets. So being a good, faithful partner that expects the flow of that partnership to go in both directions, I think is critically important. And finally, I would just add that I do think that when you get to moments like the current one, where there is a deterioration between Israelis and Palestinians, that can be destabilizing for Jordan. That can be difficult for Egypt. That can be a source of tension between Israel and new partners and preventive from progress between Israel and partners that haven't yet joined with them. And there, too, showing that the United States is invested in that, cares, tries to improve the situation long before it's possible to actually negotiate it toward a solution, so that both Israelis and Palestinians, but also everyone in that circle, broader circle that's affected by those events, sees some U.S. commitment and investment to trying to improve the situation, also adds to our leadership capability in the region.
Thank you. I appreciate all you do. Look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be back and I'm glad to work together as well.
And again, thank you, Congressman Brad Schneider, for your vision to create the Bipartisan Abraham Accords Caucus. And another point that you just made is so important, and that is that it's bipartisan, that there be every effort that can possibly be made for Iran not to achieve nuclear weapons. What a threat that would be to world stability. And it's bipartisan, truly, here, of support of every effort to block the ability of Iran to have nuclear weapons. With that, I want to thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to those in writing. And with this, we are adjourned. You survived.
I survived.
Hey, hey.